most colored, also the editor-in-chief of the very famous magazine, Mass Magazine, one of the mostly widely read and, my humble opinion, the best mass journals there is. We will speak about candidates with elections with 3 candidates. We're going to take one out to dinner at the usual place. If you'd like to join me, let me know right after the talk. Thank you.
That's a good advance. Let's sit here. I take your seat. No. Come here. Okay.
So we had a 3-candidate election. That's actually 4, but that's close to 3. The Ohio primary 2 days ago, and these are the final results. And this is copied from a website. Can you figure out somebody? I'll ask the same question I asked just a little while ago. Who didn't win this election?
I don't think Ron Paul won the election.
Ron Paul did not win the election. You can tell that from looking at these results. Who did win? Okay, that's a little harder, and you can make a case for Romney winning, and in fact that's how people are mostly reporting it. But I went to another website that took the other position and argued that what we really have here is 3 candidates. Only one of them is really a faction represented by 2 people. This is all the popular votes and caucus votes cast in all the Republican primaries so far through Super Tuesday. And the person who built this website categorized the candidates into conservatives, moderates, libertarians. Moderates is Romney, Huntsman too, it's almost all Romney. Libertarians is Paul, and all the other candidates you've heard of are conservatives in the view of this writer. And so he gets these totals, where the conservatives are winning by a pretty substantial margin, still not a majority. And here is the spin that I copied from that website. There are 3 obvious conclusions. Romney is steadily outpolling his individual rivals, but he's not winning against the conservative faction generally. The third one is pure spin. I didn't list that. But that's not a wrong spin. That's a sensible view. So if you see this as basically the Romney group versus the non-Romney group versus the Paul group, then, well, the non-Romney group won the Ohio primary. So it's a little hard to tell, even when you've got all the votes listed in full 6 digits and percentages, who won that race. Compare that with the Virginia primary, which had the interesting rule that you can only vote for one of those 2 candidates. You can't write it, you can't write anybody else. That's all. And so, who won that one? Well, you can tell. There's one winner, and this actually has an extra advantage besides being clear and having nobody argue over the rules. It's clear also, it's socially cohesive making too, because of the people who vote, half of them, more than half, actually did vote for the winner, and they know it. Maybe they had to settle, maybe they had to compromise, but they did go to the polls and they did vote for the winner, and when they come home they know they did it, and the party has had that unifying thing. In grade school, we used to play a game called Get to the Other Side. They divide us into 2 teams, one on each end of the playground. And we'd run across, and there were some rules about where you could run. And if you got tagged, you joined the team that tagged you. So you quit when everybody was on the same team. So everybody would run into the classroom saying, "We won, we won!" And it made everybody happy, and we never did catch on to that. But that's sort of, you don't get that for everybody, but you get the majority saying we made our decision. So there are a lot of advantages for a 2-person race. Here are them. In two candidate elections, there's only one way to pick a winner, so everybody knows what the rules are. If you've studied election theory, you know there are still problems with 2-person elections. If a group makes decisions by 2-candidate elections, they aren't always consistent. You can give people a series of 2-candidate elections that cause them to behave irrationally. And, well, there are problems with the system, but they are nothing like the problems with 3-candidate elections. So we're going to take the 2-candidate elections as the ideal that we aspire to. We're going to treat that as a solved problem and try to do that well with 3-candidate elections. Now, having just shown the Virginia primary and a bunch of races with Ron Paul, I wanted to find some kinds of voting that we need to give a name to before we go too far, because these make life complicated and we should have a word for each of them. So I use the term expressive voting to mean voting for a reason other than trying to influence this election. So let's go back to this one. Why is Paul there? What are those people doing? They're not influencing the result of the election. Ron Paul is not going to be president. Everybody knows that. What he is doing is building a movement. He used to be getting 2%, now he's getting 9%. He's really happy with that. So he's going to keep doing this, and people are going to keep voting for him, but none of that has very much to do with the Ohio primary, and none of it has very much to do with the presidential race. That's what I mean by expressive voting. The people are there doing what they mean to do, but it doesn't have much to do with this election. Voting for some reason other than the election is expressive voting, and strategic voting is voting in a way that is aimed at influencing this election, but isn't an obvious recitation of your preferences. Go back to that Ohio primary. Remember, it was like at the top were Romney and Santorum. Gingrich was way back. Do you suppose maybe there were some people who would prefer Gingrich but who voted for Santorum? Why would anyone do that? Well, if you're against Romney, if you want to stop Romney and you can read the polls, which everybody can, then you might well vote for the candidate who's most likely to beat Romney. So probably a few people did that. And then look back at Virginia. Why did Ron Paul get 40% vote in Virginia? Well, a lot of the people who voted for Ron Paul, very likely, would prefer Romney to Paul as president. But they would even more prefer one of the other candidates. So they voted for Paul in order to keep Romney from looking too good. That's why wouldn't you? If you're a Gingrich voter in the Virginia primary, it makes a lot of sense. Not everybody like that will vote for Paul, but some will. That's strategic voting. It is aimed at influencing the outcome of this election, but it's not an obvious listing of your preferences in the most obvious way. So strategic voting that matters, I've listed 3 kinds. You can vote for a major candidate over a minor candidate. Most people do in presidential general elections. They vote for a major party candidate, even though most people would have some other preference. If they were able to vote for their admired uncle, they might. But they know their admired uncle isn't going to win. So they vote for one of the major party candidates to try to influence which of them wins. That's strategic voting. Or if you're allowed to rank the candidates, sometimes you're involved in some sort of a selection process where you rank the candidates. One of the things that you might do if you're sort of mean and nasty is take the main rival of your favorite candidate and rank them last. Hey, that's not just mean and nasty, that's smart. You pretty much have to do that if you want to exercise your maximal vote. So people do that. People sort of differ on how much they want to do that, which makes it a little rough. It makes it harder for the voters to figure out what to do if they have to think in those terms. A lot of people don't like strategic voting because it does impose a burden on the voters to decide what to do, which is over and above the problem of deciding what they want. So okay, that's just definitions. So let's increase our body of examples. Some of you may remember this election, Bush and Gore in Florida in 2000. This isn't a 3-candidate election, but if you ignored everybody but the top 3, you'd have it pretty much the story. So what's the lesson of this? Nobody was particularly satisfied with this result. Nobody went away saying, this didn't depend on the rules. Nobody went away saying, we made our choice and more than half of us voted for the winner. It just didn't happen. What they went away saying was, all those people who voted for Nader, I wish they'd done something else. So that's one of the things that you might want to avoid. How would you avoid that? Well, how would you avoid that? How would you run an election so this kind of thing doesn't happen?
What was the question again?
How would you run an election so that this kind of thing doesn't happen? So you don't have a lot of votes for a 3rd candidate that might well have gone for one of the major candidates if people could, if things were different.
You forbid it. You only have 2 candidates.
Yeah, forbid. You have a condition to exclude those kinds of people.
So you can do that.
Yeah, have the election in 2 stages or 3 stages so that people like Nader will not be on the final.
And they did that more or less by accident in Virginia this year, and a lot of countries do that, and we could do that perfectly well.
Yeah, in France, they have rounds.
In France, they do that with runoffs, and I have a case of that. But they didn't do it here, and as a result, a lot of people are still unhappy with that result. And they're not satisfied that the people really made a clear choice. And go back a couple more elections, and people aren't satisfied with this one either. This is the national vote total. I know there was an electoral college, but the national vote total is a good proxy for it. Should anybody really be satisfied that the people chose Clinton over Bush? Well, those are the rules, and that's what we did. But everyone has to come away from this election saying, I wonder what the influence of Perot was. It would have been interesting to see, and maybe more satisfying, to have a head-to-head race between the two major candidates. Here's another one. This is the Alaska Senate race from 2 years ago. And I guess this raises the question of, if you're going to limit it to just two candidates, how do you pick the two candidates? What happened in Alaska is they had primaries. And Miller won the Republican primary, and McAdams won the Democratic primary, and there was no doubt who were the two major parties. Those were the two major candidates. But Murkowski, who was the incumbent and had run against Miller and lost, ran again as a write-in in the general and won. So how would you organize that election to get a satisfactory result? You can't just say Murkowski can't run, because that doesn't get the result they really did get. She didn't get a majority, so you... Well, let me ask about this. For people who remember that election, do you suppose Murkowski would have beaten Miller head-to-head if McAdams had dropped out and headed over? Because you remember what was going on. A lot of Democrats were voting for Murkowski as the best they could get. And if McAdams had drawn out, a lot more would have. Murkowski would have gotten a bigger majority over Miller. Would she have beaten McAdams head-to-head? Well, a lot of Miller voters would have held their breaths and voted for Murkowski. She would have won by a bigger margin. She would have beat either of them head-to-head, but she didn't get a majority, but she did win the election. So that's probably a satisfactory result, but it happened more or less by accident in this case. Here's another one, Florida Senate. That's exactly the same story. Well, no, it's not the same story. It started out the same story. Crist was the incumbent who lost in the primary and ran as an independent, but he didn't win. One of the primary candidates won. So that just shows you can have the same situation, different result. People would have liked to see how this would turn out with just two candidates, but they wouldn't have known which two candidates to test. In this race with Murkowski and this one with Crist, you can make the case for both of the incumbents who were running, Crist and Murkowski, that they were the middle candidate. In this one, it's possible to argue that Crist could have beaten either of them head-to-head. And that's pretty close to majority, so that's a hard case to argue, but it's possible. The middle candidates are often good, and one of them won and one of them lost in this case. Here's Chile in 1970. The stakes were a little bit higher. Some of you may not remember 1970. But Salvador Allende, who you may have heard of, was running as a Marxist candidate in Chile, and he was running against the representative of the incumbents party, who was seen as a middle-of-the-roader, but also the incumbents party was pretty unpopular, and a conservative. And those were the vote totals, about equal thirds. The rule in Chile was that if nobody gets a majority, the Congress picks, but there was also a very strong tradition of the Congress picking whoever the plurality winner was. So after some discussion, they picked Allende. And there was some controversy after that. So this may not have been a satisfactory result. In this case, a lot of people felt that the incumbents party could have beaten either of the others head-to-head. They were clearly seen as a middle ground, clearly seen as competent. They just didn't have the votes that the other two candidates did. So here the middle candidate came in third. And then this is, I don't want to talk about that, I'll just put it on record. This is the first round of the French presidential election in 2002, which was interesting. So here's what we want in a rule for picking three candidates, for deciding three candidate elections. So let's see if I got the right requirements here. The choice of a winner ought not to be influenced by third candidates. No Ross Perot influence, no Nader influence, no Gingrich influence on Santorum versus Romney, because that muddies the result. People are unsatisfied. It keeps the voters from expressing their real view. There ought to be some advantage for a middle candidate who is everybody's second choice. That generally is good for society if somebody who is everybody's second choice has an advantage over somebody who is nobody's second choice. And we saw a lot of cases of that where there was a pretty clear middle candidate. And they ought to have some sort of a benefit from that. And voters shouldn't have to do strategic voting unless it's at least obvious how they should do it, because it's an extra burden. So that's what we'd like. So most of the systems for doing this have people rank the candidates. So let's say you have a race between Alice and Bob and Charlie. We're going to see them again a few times. If you rank the candidates, that means there are 6 ways to cast your ballot, 6 ways to rank 3 candidates, those are they. So the entire data you get from this election is 6 categories of votes, how many ranked everybody in each way. So you don't just get how many for each candidate, though you can boil it down to that. You get 6 kinds of votes. So the question then is, how do you pick a winner once you know those 6 numbers? Well, there are various ways that have been proposed. The way we usually do it in the United States is just the plurality rule. Never mind second choices, just count first choices. Whoever gets the most wins. You didn't have to rank them. That's what we usually do. Instant runoff, we've mentioned that before. That's an attempt to deal with the minor candidates and get rid of them. And the way that works is you rank the candidates, you count all the ballots for their first choices, and then whoever is last is erased from the competition. Their ballots then are assigned to whoever ranked highest among the candidates who are still alive. With 3 candidates, they just need 1 round of that. So now all the ballots are counted for one of the 2 surviving candidates, and one of them wins and you're done. So that's the same as if you had an actual runoff, except it's quicker because you don't have to have everybody go to the polls twice. So that's actually my favorite system, but we'll see it doesn't always work. That's what happened in my fraternity when I ran for president of the fraternity in 1969. 1960s campus fraternity life was maybe different from now. But we had a liberal faction and a conservative faction. There was 1 candidate from the conservative faction and 6 of us from the liberal faction. We had 7 candidates in the election. I was in the liberal faction, was the second one to drop out. But I was able to run and show my support for the fraternity and test my voting, my political strength, because it didn't cost the faction anything. When it came down to the end, it was 1 against 1. The conservative won. Hey, that was going to be obvious from the beginning. But we went through the ritual. People dropped out step by step. It was really satisfying. It gave a good result. It doesn't always, but it did that time. So the Borda count is sort of what people think of first in kindergarten, and it works also if you're not actually trying to decide a question, but just combine opinions. You give 3 points for first place, 2 for second, third, 1 point for third, and add them up, and whoever gets the most points wins. Can you see what's wrong with that for say, a presidential race?
You have to give points to everyone. You might not want to give any points to anyone but one person.
Well, 3, 2, 1, you can make it 2, 1, 0 if you wanted. You can even make it 1, 0, minus 1.
Okay, but what I mean is, what if you only like one candidate? And then you hate the others?
You can't really express your preferences if it's not 1, 2, 3. You're sort of forced to give the equal difference between first and second, second and third. So it's kind of restrictive in that regard. Yeah.
I was going to say that the ratios are fixed. I mean, it would be totally different if you had 6 points to distribute between the 3 candidates.
Well, let's think about that. That's something called cumulative voting. But back to the Borda count, one of the problems is, let's say you have a race between favorite person of my faction's genius, their faction's genius, and harmless idiot. How am I going to rank them? Well, if I'm a strategic voter, which I would have to be, I'm going to rank my faction's genius, harmless idiot, the other faction's genius. And if there are idiots who aren't in either faction, the harmless idiot is very likely to come in with the most points, because hardly anyone's going to rank him third. That's just, it's hard to get people to write their ranks honestly. If you're trying to say, what's our favorite color? Then people will report their preferences honestly. But for candidates, they usually don't. They vote strategically. So this all started because somebody gave a talk at Bryn Mawr advocating something he called the true majority rule. And I heard one of you was talking about that a little while ago. The true majority rule is their word for picking a Condorcet winner. What's a Condorcet winner? Suppose you had all the candidates competing against each other 1 to 1. And you could do that if you had those 6 numbers from the 3 candidates. You could do it automatically. For each pair of candidates, who wins? Well, maybe Alice beats Bob and Alice beats Charlie. Then Alice is a Condorcet winner. That means somebody who would beat any other candidate head to head. Most people sort of hear that and they say, well, you know, if there is a Condorcet winner, they ought to be declared the winner of the competition. They ought to become president. And the speaker who said that was Eric Maskin, who said, let's just pick a Condorcet winner, and you made the case that there always would be one, but there isn't always one. So what is a Condorcet winner and somebody who would beat everybody? I think I was making the case that Murkowski would have beaten either Miller or McAdams. Tomic would have been in Chile, which would have saved people a lot of trouble. If you believe in the Condorcet winner, you meet that middle requirement of middle candidates doing pretty well. So I want to make a case that you might not have a Condorcet winner. This is a case where you do, probably, and they won. Here's a case where you do, and they not only lost, but would have dropped out in innocent runoff. So it's sort of hard to see how you would write rules that would cause Tomic to win, but it's easy to see why you might want him to win. So here's an example of a Condorcet cycle, a case where you don't have a Condorcet winner, even in a three-candidate election. So bear with me, this is going to be a complicated situation. Some people want to build a school, some people want to build a bridge, and some people don't want to build either one based on where they live in the county. And it's easy to see why people would divide into factions like that. And there are just a few, these are the idiot group, who want to build both, never mind how much it costs. Maybe they have a reason, okay, but there are not very many of those. And there are three candidates. One of them is one of that strange group. Charlie wants to build everything. Alice doesn't want to build anything. And Bob just wants to build a school. Too bad there are no bridge advocates in this group. So what's going to happen if you have a race among those three people? Well, okay, I got the answer. This is most of the same table, but then I claim Alice beats Bob. Alice doesn't want to build anything, and Bob just wants to build the school. Who's going to vote for Bob? Well, the school faction, and pretty much nobody else. Maybe the Charlie faction. So Alice gets 60% at least. Bob beats Charlie, because who votes for Charlie? Well, Charlie's own faction, hardly anybody else. Bob will beat Charlie pretty handily. Charlie beats Alice because both the bridge faction and the school faction will support Charlie. So, hey, that's a Condorcet cycle. Any 2-on-2 race will give a clear result. You have it over again, they'll be the same result. But the results make a little cycle. So, if you believe in Condorcet winners, you can't answer this question, how to pick a winner from this race. What time is it?
5:21.
5:21, good. So I can go through this example for real. This is as close as I'm going to get to a real scholarly conjecture in this talk. And it would be nice for somebody to make it precise enough that it could actually be proved. The advantage is if you try to prove it, you get to write all the definitions and assumptions, because they're all too big now to be that precise. But you'll know if you've proved it. I'm going to make the case that there would never be a Condorcet winner in a presidential election in the United States. And I'm going to go back to the case of the most recent presidential race, and I'm going to oversimplify it a little bit and say that there are three important factions. There are Republicans who nominated McCain and mostly want to vote for him. There are Democrats who nominated Obama, and especially after the convention, they want to be loyal Democrats. They had their party convention. They want to do what the party says and work together. They want to vote for Obama, even if they voted for Clinton in the primaries. But then there are some Democrats who, for all that loyalty, they still would prefer Clinton and would want to vote for her. So, did I put down how many people? Okay, that's a plausible description of what was going on in the previous election. So what happens if you have them rank people? Well, Clinton Democrats are still Democrats. They say Clinton, then Obama, then McCain. The other Democrats would say Obama, then Clinton, then McCain. That's their true preferences. And the Republicans, who knows how they break down between Clinton and McCain? How would they break down between Clinton and McCain? Clinton and Obama. Go back 4 years. Don't know. We can make up the facts if we need to. So, okay, what would happen if you had head-to-head races? Let's say the Republicans vote for Clinton over Obama. So, who wins in the head-to-head races? Obama versus McCain, who wins? Obama gets this group and this group, right? So he gets 55% and he wins. Hey, that's what happened. Clinton versus McCain, who wins? Same story. The Democrats all vote for Clinton, she wins. And Obama versus Clinton, what happens? Clinton wins because the Republicans all voted for Clinton. But that doesn't matter. There's still a Condorcet winner and it's still Obama, so that's pretty clear. Now, is that right?
It's Clinton now.
Clinton beats Obama, and Clinton is the Condorcet winner here, right? Okay, now, serious Democrats would not like that, because serious Democrats had a party convention. They decided who their nominee would be. They don't want people in another party deciding who's going to be president, even from their own party. Nobody would want that. So a reasonable strategy for Democrats would be to say, we want people who run in our convention to stay out of the way after that. So let us keep voting them at the bottom. So that's actually a reasonable strategy for an organized political party, is if you're a candidate in our party, that's your shot, then we want you to stay away. And most of the candidates would say that. So what happens here? Do you have a Condorcet winner? What happens with Clinton and Obama? Clinton gets the Republicans plus her own faction, right? Clinton is the winner. Clinton and McCain? Republicans and Clinton Democrats. No, wait. Clinton and McCain. Now McCain wins, right? Because the Democrats are enforcing their rule and the Republicans are voting their preference. So McCain beats Clinton, Clinton beats Obama, and now Obama and McCain, that's what actually happened. Obama still wins. No Condorcet winner. I think that's the end of the cycling. Everybody is now voting their most strategic position. It's a little hard to be sure of that. You can check a lot of things. But this is my conjecture, that if there is any reasonably disciplined faction that can control 40% of the voters, can prevent there being a Condorcet winner. So if it favors any serious faction, either major political party or any serious faction, then whatever the backup plan is, if the backup plan favors any faction, that faction will make sure we go to the backup plan. Therefore, there will never be a Condorcet winner in a US presidential election. Make sense? Well, I didn't check all the bases. And you'd have to define things if you actually wanted to prove something. But I think that's my answer to Eric Maskin. It is not helpful to say pick a Condorcet winner, because it would never happen. If you have a backup plan, that's it. So let's talk about instant runoff. So I've tried to list the advantages and the disadvantages of instant runoff as I see them. One of the advantages is voters really do get to say who they want. We don't get big votes for, say, the Green Party and the Libertarians in the United States. It's probably safe to say that there are more than 0.5% of Americans who would really like the Libertarian to win, and there are more than about 2 or 3% who would really like the Greens to win. But they're not idiots. They want to influence the result. They vote for a major party candidate. So you hardly see the Libertarians and Greens don't get to show off their voting power. They might well jump to the 10% range.
You just insulted me.
Yeah.
I'm not an idiot. I'm an idiot.
No, it's perfectly reasonable to vote for Libertarians or Greens. But it's also perfectly reasonable to favor the Libertarians and Greens and vote for a major party candidate anyway. It comes down to a lot of choices you have to make.
No,
there are reasons for both.
Yeah, my wife agrees you. I'm an idiot.
Right. So again, we talk about expressive voting. Expressive voting is not dumb. It's a reasonable choice. But lots of people don't do it. So of the people who might prefer to vote for Libertarians and Greens, we don't see them in US national elections. 10% is probably fair for either group, and we just don't see that. So those parties are really getting dumped on, but also they're getting dumped on because their most loyal members and their most expressive members don't get to influence the major election because they're too busy voting for somebody else. So if you let them have the best of both worlds, let them express themselves, let them show up in the first round just voting for who they want, and then still let them influence the result, it's probably a happier result. And you can't cheat. You can vote strategically, but when it comes down to it, you got to rank the candidates. You ought to put you ought to put A ahead of B if you prefer A to B, because there's no reason not to. And you get this social